President Trump just hit pause on a plan to increase taxes on Canadian products coming into the US. Originally, he wanted to charge an extra 25% tax starting soon, but he's pushed it back a whole month to April 2nd. It sounds like after talking things over with Canada and hearing worries from different businesses, he's decided to wait a little longer. But Canada isn't just sitting around waiting quietly. Dominic LeBlanc, Canada's finance minister, announced that Canada will also delay its second round of taxes on American goods. These taxes were supposed to be worth a whopping $125 billion, but now they'll hold off until the same new date, April 2nd. However, the first batch of Canadian taxes, hitting about $30 billion of American products, stays in place. One Canadian province is especially bold right now: British Columbia, or BC for short. Why? Well, BC is special because it's like a bridge between the main US states and Alaska. Lots of trucks go through BC to reach Alaska. Now, BC leaders are saying, hey, two can play this game. Premier David Eby announced he's working on new rules that would let BC charge fees to American trucks traveling through to Alaska. It's their way of saying, if you're going to put tariffs on us, we'll make things a bit tricky for you too. Premier Eby explained his move very clearly. We want the US president and the leaders in Alaska to hear us loud and clear. We're tired of these threats, and we're not going to put up with it anymore. But BC has even more plans up its sleeve. They might also pass laws to make sure the fuel used in cars and trucks has additives produced right here in Canada. Why? Because that would mean Canada depends less on American products. BC also wants to break down some trading roadblocks between provinces inside Canada to help businesses thrive without relying so much on the US. Even though President Trump eased up a little on the tariffs, Premier Eby says Canada shouldn't relax yet. He insists Canada needs to stay tough until the US drops its tariff threats completely. Enough is enough, Eby says. We'll stand firm until we're sure the threats stop. Premier David Eby is making some bold moves to protect British Columbia from the US government's new tariffs, but he's doing it a bit differently. Instead of jumping straight into action, Eby plans to set up laws that would give BC special tools if things get tough. For now, he's not charging trucks any extra money, but he's letting the US know he's serious about defending BC businesses. As Eby explained, we never asked for this fight, but since the US started it, we're going to stand up for ourselves. And he's not stopping there. Soon, Eby's government will introduce new rules to help BC companies stay strong if things get worse with the US. These include ideas like making sure certain fuel ingredients are made right here in Canada, rather than imported from elsewhere. They'll also make trading easier between different parts of Canada, so businesses won't depend so heavily on US products. Another interesting plan is to charge American trucks a small fee when they drive through BC on their way to Alaska. It may not affect many trucks right away, but it sends a strong message: Canada won't be pushed around. Eby also made a quick move to pull certain American-made products off store shelves in BC, like liquor from states that support the US tariffs. It's his way of saying, if you hurt us, we'll buy from someone else. All across Canada, the provinces and the federal government are working together, calling it the Team Canada strategy. They've already introduced their own big tariffs on US goods to push back against the US pressure. But they're also exploring new places to sell Canadian products, creating jobs, especially in smaller towns and remote areas. In fact, BC alone is speeding up new projects worth $20 billion, bringing about 8,000 new jobs for communities that really need them. To make sure everything goes smoothly, Eby has put together two important teams. The first is the Trade and Economic Security Task Force, made up of business leaders, workers, and indigenous groups, to manage how British Columbia handles this economic challenge. The second group focuses specifically on protecting BC's farms and food supply, ensuring everyone in the province has plenty of food, no matter what happens next. Right now, British Columbia is getting ready to handle some tricky issues about lumber sales with the United States. They've put together a special group whose main job is figuring out the best ways to protect BC's lumber industry. They're thinking of smart ideas to keep trade flowing smoothly and peacefully, even when things get tough between Canada and the US. This is part of a bigger plan. BC doesn't just want to survive tough times, it wants to become stronger. The government is coming up with bold ideas to keep businesses safe, protect jobs, and build an economy that can bounce back quickly whenever problems pop up. But here's something you might not realize. Canada actually has a special job in helping the US reach Alaska. Why? Because Alaska isn't connected by land to the rest of the United States. There's a big chunk of Canada sitting right in between. So, if people or goods want to travel by road from the lower US states to Alaska, they must drive through Canada. One really important road that helps this happen is called the Alaska Highway. This isn't just any road. It's a super long highway built way back during World War II. It starts in a place called Dawson Creek in British Columbia and stretches all the way up into Alaska. People built it so supplies could safely reach soldiers. Today, it's still the main route for cars and trucks moving between Alaska and the rest of America. The road isn't easy though. Even after all these years, much of it still passes through mountains, forests, and remote places in Canada. Drivers can spend hours and hours traveling through wild landscapes before finally crossing into Alaska. But roads aren't the only way Canada helps connect Alaska to the US airplanes. Flying between Alaska and other states depend on Canadian skies too. Pilots have to fly over Canada, and sometimes planes even land briefly in Canadian cities. Canada works closely with the US to make sure flights move safely through their airspace. There's no train that directly links Alaska with the lower states, so trains carrying things like food, fuel, and supplies often pass through Canadian ports, especially in Vancouver, BC. Vancouver is a busy spot where lots of products arrive by ship or train and then continue on to Alaska. Traveling by car means crossing the border between Canada and the US, which happens a lot. Thankfully, Canada and America usually get along well, making it easy for families, tourists, and truck drivers to pass through. It's a friendship that keeps life simpler for both countries. If you're traveling from the rest of the US up to Alaska, there's one important rule. You have to follow Canada's rules along the way. Before entering Canada, travelers must show their passports and have their papers ready, making sure everything checks out so they can pass through smoothly. Canada isn't just a pit stop for travelers, though. It also plays a huge part in helping Alaska share its riches with the world. Alaska is famous for having tons of oil and natural gas underground, and Canada helps these resources travel where they need to go. Think of Canada like a big bridge that lets Alaska's energy move down into the rest of America, and even to countries far across the ocean. Pipes and ships move all this valuable stuff safely through Canada, keeping the lights on in homes thousands of miles away. The friendship between Alaska and Canada isn't only about energy. These neighbors also do a lot of buying and selling with each other, adding up to more than $1 billion each year. Alaska sends nearly $600 million worth of products to Canada, while Canada ships over $750 million worth back to Alaska. They trade things like fish, energy products, and items made in factories, helping keep jobs and businesses strong in both places. But not everything travels by road or pipeline. Ships also do a lot of the heavy lifting. There's a beautiful ocean route called the Inside Passage, filled with islands, mountains, and forests along the way. Ships and ferries travel this route all the time, carrying tourists, locals, and supplies between towns along the coast of Alaska and British Columbia. It's a lifeline, especially for places where roads don't reach easily. Two big ferry services, one run by Alaska and the other by British Columbia, make sure people and goods move regularly. These boats connect communities, making it easier for people to travel, trade, or just visit family in areas that might otherwise feel isolated. Nova Scotia's Premier Tim Houston isn't happy with the new tariffs from the US. In fact, he thinks they're unfair and dangerous. He called out President Trump, saying the decision isn't smart and could hurt both countries. But Houston didn't just complain, he quickly started taking action. Nova Scotia decided that American companies won't be allowed to win contracts from the provincial government anymore, and they're looking closely at deals already in place. They've also doubled the fees American trucks pay to use important highways and pulled American-made drinks off shelves in liquor stores. The province is even setting aside extra money in next year's budget. just in case these tariffs cause bigger problems later on. On top of that, Nova Scotia wants Canadians to buy more goods made at home and plans to make trading within Canada easier. Houston asked everyone to stick together and support Canadian businesses. Over in Alberta, Premier Danielle Smith called the U.S. tariffs unfair and warned they'll only cause pain for people on both sides, higher prices and fewer jobs. She's supporting Canada's big pushback and promised Alberta would announce its own set of strong measures within a day. Smith also urged Canadian provinces to come together by removing barriers that slow down trade between them. She wants Canada to build more pipelines and facilities to export oil and gas, making the country less dependent on the U.S. Smith believes Canada must build stronger connections with other countries around the world and invest more in defense, especially with global tensions rising. In Manitoba, Premier Wab Kinew wasted no time. He immediately pulled American-made drinks from liquor stores across his province, showing strong support for Canada's stance against the U.S. tariffs. Premier Andrew Furey from Newfoundland and Labrador also spoke out firmly, calling the tariffs wrong and unfair. Right away, he removed American products from liquor stores, stopped buying new goods from the U.S., and began looking for new markets, especially in Europe. Furey also formed a special group to plan how Canada can respond better to these trade problems in the future. He encouraged all Canadians to stick together, saying it's important to defend Canada's values and independence. Across Canada, there's now a major effort underway to rely less on the U.S. Ottawa, the country's capital, is helping businesses look for new places to sell their products, like Europe, Asia, and Latin America. The government is even giving money and loans to help Canadian companies make this shift, so they won't be hurt as much when things get tricky with the U.S. Right now, British Columbia is speeding up big business projects and trying to find new buyers overseas. Meanwhile, provinces along Canada's east coast are sending more seafood to places in Europe. The idea is simple. If selling to the U.S. gets harder, Canada needs other customers to keep business flowing. For years, America has been Canada's best trading buddy. They're neighbors and have done lots of business together. But now, because the U.S. keeps threatening tariffs, Canada is quickly looking elsewhere. Luckily, Canada already has friendly trading deals with lots of countries, like those in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Officials are now encouraging Canadian businesses to use these deals to replace lost sales in the U.S. America says these tariffs are allowed because they protect its national security. But Canada thinks that's just an excuse, so it's busy finding other partners, especially countries that are growing quickly, like India. Canada is also working more closely with Mexico and countries around the Pacific Ocean to build a stronger, more balanced trading network that doesn't depend so heavily on the U.S. companies across Canada are changing how they work. Farmers and factories are looking for new ways to sell their products or different materials they can use instead. Even stores are swapping out American-made items for Canadian or foreign-made ones. Everyone is rushing to adjust because these tariffs have made finding new customers urgent. But here's an interesting thing. Fighting over trade isn't new for Canada and America. They've disagreed many times throughout history. One big disagreement started back in the 1980s about lumber. Wood used to build houses. America said Canada sold its wood too cheaply, hurting U.S. companies. Canada disagreed strongly, leading to decades of fights, tariffs, and legal arguments. Even earlier, in 1930, the U.S. put heavy taxes on goods from Canada and other countries. Canada quickly hit back by putting taxes on American goods, causing both countries to lose money. Another tense moment was in 1971, when the U.S. put extra charges on goods, including Canadian products, due to money troubles. That lasted a short while, but it showed again how easily trade fights could happen. A similar story played out more recently, too. In 2002, President Bush put heavy taxes on steel coming into the U.S. from other countries. But Canada and Mexico got special treatment and didn't have to pay. Still, other countries pushed back, and the taxes were eventually removed. Then, in 2018, President Trump taxed steel and aluminum again, claiming it was for national security. Canada quickly responded by taxing American goods too, which pushed both countries back to negotiations. After about a year, the US dropped those tariffs, proving to Canada that being firm and united can sometimes lead America to rethink its plans. That's why Canadian provinces, businesses, and leaders are sticking together this time, hoping teamwork will convince America to change its mind again. Back when Canada and the US worked out their big trade deal, known as the USMCA, a few years ago, Canada learned something important. Stand your ground when America tries to push you around. Prime Minister Trudeau made it clear that Canada wouldn't let itself get bullied. That lesson is guiding how Canada handles trade problems today. Now, President Trump has decided to put big taxes, called tariffs, on almost everything coming into the US from Canada. Canada thinks these new taxes break the rules they both agreed to. The whole point of the USMCA was to make trading easier and cheaper, not harder. Charging 25% extra on goods from Canada goes directly against the main idea of their trade deal. The US says these tariffs are needed for national security reasons. President Trump even linked the tariffs to problems like drugs crossing the border, claiming Canada isn't doing enough to stop dangerous substances like fentanyl. But Canada argues this doesn't make sense because the US is taxing nearly everything, not just items related to safety or health. In other words, Canada thinks this is just an excuse to tax Canadian products unfairly. Canada can officially challenge these tariffs through special rules built into the USMCA. If they win, the US is supposed to remove the tariffs. But even then, it might take a long time, usually more than a year, for the process to finish. And sometimes, even if Canada wins, the US might choose not to listen. That's why Canada isn't waiting around. They've quickly responded by taxing American products coming into Canada. This sends a strong message that Canada won't quietly accept being treated unfairly. Canada could also complain to another big group called the WTO, which watches over global trade. But even there, getting America to follow the rules isn't always easy. Canada does have other options. They could legally stop following certain parts of the USMCA until the US plays fair again. Or they might even try challenging the tariffs in American courts, though US judges often side with the president when he uses emergency powers. But the truth is, this problem probably won't be solved by judges or official complaints alone. Instead, both sides will likely need to sit down, talk, and work things out through careful negotiation and political pressure. If you enjoyed this video and loves the direction Canada is moving towards, be sure to like and subscribe.